What if I told you that chasing a bigger salary is one of the most expensive mistakes you can make? Not because earning more is bad, but because most people spend their entire lives running toward a number that keeps moving. You hit $60,000 a year, then you need $80,000. You hit $80,000, then suddenly $100,000 feels like the real goal. And somewhere along the way, you stop asking whether the goal itself is the problem. Here's what almost nobody in personal finance talks about. It's not your income that sets you free. It's one specific number sitting quietly in your savings account. And that number is $100,000. My name is Julia, and for the past several years, I've been studying what actually changes people's financial lives. Not in theory, but in the real, daily, practical way that makes you feel different when you wake up on a Monday morning.
If you want to understand the real mechanics behind financial security, make sure you subscribe to Julia Invests and hit that like button if this helps you think differently. Now, let's talk about something that might make you uncomfortable. Most people believe that if they just earned more, everything else would fall into place. The stress would disappear, the anxiety would lift, they'd finally feel like they had a handle on their money. But here's the problem with that thinking. Income is a faucet. Savings is the tank. It doesn't matter how fast the faucet runs if there's a hole at the bottom of the tank. And the truth is, $100,000 in liquid savings is the point where the tank finally becomes large enough that the hole stops mattering. Let me show you exactly why.
Shift 1. You stop playing defense with your life. When you have very little saved, every single financial decision you make is a defensive move. Should I switch jobs? Too risky. Should I negotiate my salary? Better not push it. Should I take a week off without pay to deal with my health? Absolutely not. Every choice gets filtered through the same terrifying question. Can I afford for this to go wrong? And when the answer is always no, you don't build a life, you survive one. Think about the last time you stayed in a job that was making you miserable, or the last time you didn't speak up when you should have,
or the last time you said yes to something because you couldn't afford to say no. That's not a personality trait. That's a savings problem. When you have $100,000 sitting in your account, that calculation changes completely. Suddenly, you have runway. You have months of options. You have the ability to say, I don't like where this is going, and I can afford to walk. That shift from survival mode to decision mode is worth more than any raise you've ever been given.
Shift 2. Your brain gets its RAM back. There's a concept in behavioral economics called the scarcity tax, and it's one of the most underrated forces in personal finance. When you're worried about money, your brain is running calculations constantly in the background. Can I afford this? What happens if the car breaks down? How many days until payday? What's the minimum I can put on this credit card? You don't notice it happening, but it's always there, running quietly in the background, eating your focus, stealing your creativity, making you worse at your job, your relationships, your thinking. Research shows financial stress measurably reduces cognitive performance, not because stressed people are less intelligent, but because their mental resources are already spoken for. Imagine trying to write a presentation with 40 other apps running in the background. You can do it, but you'll never do your best work. When you hit $100,000 in savings, those background apps start shutting down. Not because you're rich, but because the low-level threat is gone. Your brain stops spending energy managing fear and starts spending it on actually moving your life forward. That cognitive freedom is invisible. You won't see it on a balance sheet, but you will feel it the moment it happens. Shift 3. Emergencies stop feeling like emergencies. Here's the real problem with a $5,000 emergency fund. It sounds responsible, and it is, until life reminds you that it keeps its own calendar. Your car needs $2,800 in repairs. Okay, that's what the fund is for. Except now you're down to $2,200, and the anxiety kicks in immediately. You're already thinking about rebuilding, already bracing for the next hit. Then your roof leaks, $1,800. Then your dog needs emergency surgery, $2,400. And just like that, you're not ahead of the problem anymore. You're exactly where you started, just more exhausted.
This is the treadmill that feels like progress, but is actually running in place. Now picture that same scenario with $100,000 in savings. Car repair, $2,800. You still have $97,200. Roof leak, $1,800. You're at $95,400. Dog surgery, $2,400. You're at $93,000. Annoying? Absolutely. Catastrophic? Not even close. That's the difference between a $5,000 emergency fund and $100,000 in real financial cushion. One makes you feel responsible, the other makes you feel untouchable.
Shift 4. You finally understand what wealthy actually means. Here's a distinction that changes everything once you really see it. Rich is about income. Wealthy is about assets. Rich is how much flows through your hands. Wealthy is how much stays. You can earn $250,000 a year and be broke. I've seen it. Most people have. Big houses, new cars, designer everything. And underneath it all, one bad quarter away from disaster. And you can earn $65,000 a year and be genuinely, quietly, powerfully wealthy. If you've built up real assets, if you've kept what you earned.
The person who makes $250,000 and spends $260,000 is operating from the same scarcity mindset as someone living paycheck to paycheck at $40,000. The dollar amounts are different. The psychology is identical. But when you have $100,000 saved, you've crossed over. You've stopped being someone who earns money and started becoming someone who builds it. And that mental shift is not subtle. It changes how you see every financial decision you make afterward.
Shift 5. Your money starts working so you don't have to. When you have $5,000 invested, compound growth sounds like a nice idea. A 10% annual return means $500. That's appreciated, but it doesn't change your life. When you have $100,000 invested, that same 10% return is $10,000. That's a month and a half of someone's salary generated while you slept. This is the point where compound growth stops being a concept and starts being a second income. And once you feel that, once you actually see $10,000 appear in your portfolio that you didn't work a single hour to earn, your entire relationship with work transforms. You stop thinking about your job as the only engine. You start thinking about how to build a second one, and then a third. That's the compounding effect wealthy people keep talking about, not just the math. The mindset shift that comes with it.
Shift 6. The path to $100,000 changes you before you arrive. Here's what most people miss about this goal. The destination matters less than who you become on the way there. You cannot accidentally save $100,000. It doesn't happen because you got lucky. It doesn't happen because you cut out coffee. It doesn't happen because you followed one weird trick from a YouTube video. Getting to $100,000 requires you to become someone different, someone who consistently earns more than they spend.
Someone who resists lifestyle inflation when every social signal is telling them to upgrade. Someone who thinks in years instead of weeks. Saving $10,000 proves you can be disciplined for a few months. Saving $100,000 proves you've built a system. The person who reaches $100,000 is not just wealthier than the person who stopped at $10,000. They think differently. They decide differently. They have internalized habits and frameworks that make it nearly impossible for them to ever truly feel broke again, even if they lose some of it, even if markets crash, even if life happens. Because they know how it was built. And they know they can build it again.
Now, let's be honest about something. Most people who watch this video will not reach $100,000 in savings. Not because they can't, but because they won't make it a non-negotiable. They'll agree with everything said here, they'll feel motivated for a few days, and then they'll finance a car they don't need, take a vacation they can't afford, or quietly tell themselves that they'll start saving seriously next year. Next year always arrives, and it always has the same excuse. But if you're one of the few who actually commits, who decides the $100,000 is the line and everything before it is just the work, your entire life is about to look different.
Not just your bank account, your stress levels, your relationships, your career options, your mornings. The way you walk into a room when you know you don't desperately need anything from it. The path is not complicated, even if it is hard. Earn more than you spend. Not by a little, by a lot. Automate your savings before your brain has a chance to spend it. Invest consistently in boring index funds without drama. Treat lifestyle inflation like the silent wealth killer it is. Be ruthless about your income ceiling and keep raising it. And repeat this for years without getting distracted by what everyone else is buying. One day you'll open your banking app and the number will be there, $100,000. And you'll realize that the number didn't change your life. You did. The number just made it visible. You don't need to be rich. You just need this number. And everything that comes before it is the version of you that earns what comes after it.